I only wanted to make his day special. But instead I discovered the lie that would end my marriage. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the guard said, "Ma'am, the boss's wife is already inside"? My name is Wilma. I like silence. In silence you hear the things people try hardest to hide. That morning I stood by the kitchen counter planning a small gesture. Nothing grand, just love in a paper bag. I made Edward's favorite chicken sandwiches, poured coffee into his thermos, and slipped a note inside, "Let's steal lunch together." Edward thrived in crowded rooms and big speeches. I believed in small acts that held worlds inside them. Before leaving I looked in the mirror. A simple dress, hair pulled back, a quiet confidence. A surprise shouldn't shout, it should whisper. When I reached his company's glass building, his face was on the LED screen outside. Discipline and loyalty, the marks of a true leader. Loyalty. I repeated the word silently, unaware that it would soon fracture into irony. At the entrance I smiled at the security guard and handed over my ID. "No entry for unauthorized persons," he said, polite but firm. "I'm the boss's wife," I replied, still smiling. "Just a surprise visit." That's when the corner of his mouth lifted, that little smirk that means you don't know what I know. "Ma'am, I see the wife every day," he said, pointing toward the revolving doors. "She's right there, coming out now." The world tilted. A woman walked out, silk blouse, designer bag, gold chain glinting at her neck. Her walk was rehearsed confidence. The kind that doesn't ask permission to exist. For a moment I thought I'd faint. Instead I froze. Neither of us spoke. The only sound between us was the word "wife," still echoing from the guard's mouth. She stepped into a black sedan waiting at the curb. The driver opened the door, she dipped her chin and for a second, I swear, her eyes brushed mine. Or maybe I just wanted them to. Then she was gone. The guard hesitated. "Maybe you'd like me to call Mr. Hart?" "No need," I said softly. Even to my own ears my voice sounded different. Older, steadier. I tightened my grip on the lunch bag. The thermos burned against my palm. I turned and walked away. My footsteps sounded like punctuation marks. One for every suspicion that had ever gone unspoken. Across the street was a cafe. I went in, sat by the window facing the lobby, ordered an Americano and opened my notebook. Security guard. Wife comes every day. Woman. Early 30s, elegant, black sedan driver. Time. 12:18 p.m. I wrote it all down. Revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with record keeping. My phone buzzed. A text from Edward. "Crazy meetings today. Can't leave the office for lunch. I'll make it up tonight. Love you." Through the window the black sedan turned the corner. Meetings. I thought. I decided not to confront him. Not yet. I would pretend nothing happened. That night I set the sandwiches on the table, still wrapped, untouched. When Edward came home he said, "Rough day. Back-to-back meetings." I smiled. I know. Traffic must have been awful. He hugged me. Same cologne, but a new undertone. A scent I didn't recognize. The scent of someone else's skin. We ate in silence. I listened. Between his sentences I placed my memories from earlier. The guard, the chain, the car. After dinner while he showered I noticed his phone on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I wasn't hunting for proof. I was looking for peace, which is harder to find. When he fell asleep I opened his drawer to straighten the business cards he always tossed inside. That's when I saw it. A visitor pass, plastic sleek. No name. Just, VIP guest/12th floor. I slipped it into my purse. Because quiet plans need quiet evidence. I didn't sleep. The ceiling shadows shifted like waves. Betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hums until morning. At dawn I brewed coffee. Edward rushed out. Big meeting, late dinner. "Of course," I said. My voice was calm, maybe too calm. Once he left I began mapping patterns. Meeting. Late. Exhausted. I called the company's HR desk, posing as a curious spouse. "Could you explain the visitor policy for family members?" The polite woman told me every entry was logged digitally. Perfect. Then I went back to the cafe across the street. Same seat. Same view. At 12:10 the black sedan arrived. At 12:18 the door spun. The same woman stepped out, but this time I noticed the gold pendant. The letter E dangled from her chain. Edward's initial. She lifted her phone, lips moving. I couldn't hear, but I read them. Hi, love. I'm leaving now. I felt the words land inside me like stones. When she drove off, I crossed the street. A new guard, a young woman, manned the desk. I'm here for a scheduled appointment, I said easily. She handed me a visitor card after checking the list. Wilma Hart, spouse, protocol. That label. My whole marriage reduced to a database entry. I pressed the elevator button. 12th floor. The mirrored walls reflected a woman who wasn't naive anymore. Edward's office door was half open. No one inside. 2 coffee cups on the desk. One with lipstick. I didn't need to check whose. On his assistant's desk, a planner lay open. Friday retreat, Lakeview. Such a gentle word for running away. I heard footsteps. His. I slipped into a nearby conference room, heart pounding. Through the glass wall I saw him lift his phone. I'm heading into a meeting, he murmured. Then he walked to the assistant's desk, hers, and took his notes. On his jacket pocket glimmered a gold E-pin. I realized then, my name didn't live anywhere on him. When he turned down the corridor, I stepped out, walked to the elevator, and left. At the lobby desk, I handed back the visitor card, but not before glancing at the sign-in book. Clara Wilkins, internal meetings. Same name, same time, every weekday for weeks. Outside sunlight felt wrong. Warm but untrustworthy. I walked home slowly, my mind already sketching a plan. Not a loud one. Precise one. I don't slam mirrors. I place them where the light hits hardest. That evening, he said, there's an appreciation dinner next week. Spouses aren't invited, very formal. I understand, I smiled. Very formal. Inside me, another voice whispered, then I'll be formal too. After he slept, I opened my laptop. Emails, old signatures, account names. I created a folder. Company/entries/dates. I scanned my notes, typed up the timestamps, added a photo of the VIP guest pass. I named the file simply, Wife. Then I composed an email to the company's external legal firm. Subject, meeting request. Dear Counsel, I'm Wilma Hart. I'd like to verify certain company documents and entry records signed under my name. Please confirm a private appointment tomorrow. I hovered over send. My hands trembled. Courage doesn't mean lack of fear. It means pressing send anyway. The tiny message flashed. Mail sent. At 6 a.m. my phone buzzed. Confirmed. Today 3 p.m. confidential meeting. I set the cup down. The porcelain clinked softly, the sound of something beginning. Because this is how a war of silence starts. I am Wilma. I don't scream. I take notes. And sometimes the sharpest line in a marriage is the one that's never spoken. That afternoon a new email arrived. Annual appreciation dinner. Executive spouses welcome. When Edward told me that night spouses aren't invited, I had already seen the list. And right below my name there it was, Clara Wilkins, +1 spouse. When I received the dinner invitation that morning, my first reaction wasn't anger. It was confirmation. It meant the system had recognized 2 wives. One legitimate, one counterfeit. One with papers. One with access. I stared at the email, the company's blue logo shimmering above the words, Executive Spouses Welcome. Edward had looked me in the eye last night and said, it's a formal event. No spouses allowed. He wasn't just lying, he was performing. And I was done being an audience. I spent that morning in quiet motion. The kind of stillness that comes when every emotion turns into calculation. I called the law firm again, confirmed my 3 p.m. meeting, and printed every document I had signed over the past 10 years. When Edward left for work, I watched from the window as he kissed his phone screen before stepping into his car. That gesture, the absent-minded tenderness, used to belong to me. At 3 o'clock sharp, I entered the office of Riley & Sons Legal Associates. The senior partner, a sharp woman named Monica Riley, greeted me with a firm handshake. Mrs. Hart, she said. We've worked with your husband for years. How can I help you? I'm not sure yet, I replied. But I think I've been signing more than marriage certificates. Her eyebrows lifted slightly, interest not pity. Good. I laid the stack of papers on her desk. These are my signatures on multiple company filings. I'd like to know what I actually own. She scanned them quickly, eyes narrowing. Well, Mrs. Hart, According to these, you're not just the spouse of the CEO. You're also the primary shareholder in Heart Dynamics Group. Excuse me. She nodded. 58%. It seems your husband transferred ownership to you years ago, likely for tax sheltering. My guess is he never expected you to notice. Her tone was professional, but her eyes softened for a moment. The brief acknowledgement of a woman who's seen this story before. She turned the documents toward me. Everything he built rests on your name. I felt my pulse in my fingertips. The ground shifted again, but this time in my favor. He's been using my name to protect himself? Exactly, Monica said. And if he's been careless, it could be used to protect you instead. I left the office with 2 folders. One labeled Financial Holdings, the other, Potential Liabilities. Both carried the same truth. The empire had been built on my blind trust. And trust, when broken, becomes evidence. That evening, Edward returned late. He smelled of cologne and champagne. Crazy day, he said. We're preparing for the dinner. Big investors coming. Should I get a new dress? I asked casually. He froze mid-sip. What for? For the dinner, of course. You said spouses weren't invited, but I got a message. His eyes flicked up sharply, the first real crack in his composure. A mistake, he said quickly. You know how admin errors happen. Of course, I smiled. Mistakes happen all the time. He didn't notice my hand resting on the folder beside my chair. The one labeled Ownership. After he went to bed, I logged into the company's public records portal. My access was still active. I clicked through the corporate directory, departments, payroll, project codes. Then under Executive Assistants, I found her, Clara Wilkins. A clean profile photo. Corporate smile. Listed as Strategic Operations Liaison. Salary, $240,000. Benefits, full coverage, company car, discretionary travel budget. For an assistant, she was being paid like an executive. I clicked Travel Reports. Her last expense submission, Lakeview Corporate Retreat, 2 guests. Under Spouse/Partner, a single name was listed. Edward Hart. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor painting the room in cold blue light. For a moment I didn't move. The human heart can't process betrayal at the same speed the eyes read it. When I finally exhaled, it wasn't sorrow that filled the air. It was clarity. I began collecting. Emails from Edward's work account to her corporate inbox. Lunch receipts charged to company credit cards. Digital meeting logs showing off-site briefings. Every timestamp matched the moments he told me he was in meetings. They had built a rhythm. So would I. The next day I returned to the cafe opposite the building. My silent observation post. The same black sedan arrived at noon. Clara stepped out, phone to her ear, laughter spilling like rehearsed confidence. When she entered the building, I followed from across the street. Inside the lobby, the new security guard recognized me from the visitor list. Good afternoon, Mrs. Hart, she said politely. I smiled. Good afternoon. I let my gaze drift toward the security monitor, the feed of the elevator cameras. Claire was inside, heading up to the 12th floor. The same floor as Edward. I turned away before the guard could notice the way my jaw clenched. I didn't need confrontation, not yet. I needed certainty. I left the building and went to the records office 3 blocks away. There, under the company's filings, I found something even more disturbing. A set of new accounts under Heart Dynamics Holdings Auxiliary. Each one tied to expense approvals from Strategic Liaison, Clara W. Each one signed off by E. Hart. Money, meetings, lies, all dancing together on paper. When I came home that evening, Edward was already there, sitting in the dark, laptop open. You look tired, I said. He smiled faintly. I've been handling too much. Yes, I replied. It must be hard managing everything. He nodded, oblivious to the weight behind my words. As he showered, I walked into his office. On the desk lay his phone face down. A message flashed across the screen. Clara, see you tomorrow at 12. Lakeview plans confirmed. My reflection in the dark screen looked unfamiliar. Calmer, older, sharper. Not the betrayed wife. The architect of exposure. That night I couldn't sleep again. Instead I drafted what I called my silent ledger. A digital folder containing every shred of data, every timestamp, every overlapping story. I divided it into sections: financial, behavioral, legal, emotional. The 4 pillars of any downfall. By 2 a.m. I had enough material to build the first wall of his collapse. But I wasn't going to expose him yet. No, I wanted him to feel safe. Safe enough to invite me to the edge of his illusion. 3 days later the dinner arrived. Edward left early, tuxedo pressed, voice smooth. "I'll be home late." Investors' speeches, you know the drill. I kissed his cheek lightly. "Break a leg." "Always," he said with a smirk. He didn't ask why I was dressed too. Navy gown, pearls, hair pinned like the wife of a man worth protecting. He didn't even notice the envelope in my clutch, labeled ownership confirmation, confidential. At 7 p.m. I entered the grand ballroom of the Kingswell Hotel. Crystal chandeliers. Laughter. The air smelled of champagne and ego. When I stepped inside, the host nearly dropped his tablet. "Mrs. Hart," he stammered. "We weren't expecting." "Oh, I'm sure," I interrupted gently. "But my name is on the invitation list, isn't it?" He checked. It was. The room fell briefly silent when I walked in. Edward turned mid-conversation with investors. His expression shifted from confidence to panic in a single heartbeat. "Wilma," he said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise. I thought I'd finally attend one of those events I'm never invited to," I said sweetly. Beside him stood Clara, radiant in gold, her hand brushing his sleeve like she belonged there. Around her neck the same gold chain, the same letter E. If irony had a color, it would be that metallic gleam. I lifted my glass to them both. "To loyalty," I said softly. He smiled, not understanding. He did. His jaw tightened. The night played out in slow motion. Laughter that wasn't real, music that sounded like pretense. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't shout. I just watched. Because sometimes the most frightening thing you can do to a liar is simply let him see you seeing him. When dessert arrived, my phone buzzed. A message from Monica Riley, my lawyer. "Wilma, the ownership documents you requested are finalized. You'll want to see this immediately." I looked across the table. Edward was busy whispering something into Clara's ear. She laughed, tilting her head, a practiced gesture of intimacy. I smiled, placed my napkin neatly on the table and whispered to myself, "Dinner's over." The next morning I sat in Monica's office again. She slid a folder across the desk. "Wilma," she said quietly, "you might want to brace yourself. It turns out, you don't just own shares. You own the company." The folder Monica slid toward me felt heavier than its weight. Inside it, everything I thought I knew about my life had been rewritten in fine print. The title page read, "Ownership Confirmation, Hart Dynamics Group." Below that, my name. Wilma Hart, 58% majority shareholder. I had been sleeping beside the CEO for years, but I was the owner all along. Monica looked at me carefully. "You're the legal proprietor, Wilma. He placed the shares in your name years ago. Tax maneuvering, asset shielding. But he never reversed it. I traced the embossed letters with my fingertip. So in his arrogance he made me powerful." "In his arrogance," she repeated. "Exactly." Silence filled the room. For the first time in months I wasn't the one being deceived. I was the one holding the cards. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to see the truth," I said. "All of it. Every number, every secret. I want to know how deep the rot goes before I decide how to clean it." Monica nodded. "Then we'll begin an independent audit." Quietly. "Officially it's a routine compliance check. Privately it's a scalpel." She smiled faintly. "And Wilma?" "Yes. Don't warn him. Let him think you're still the same." That night I drove home through the rain. The city lights blurred on the windshield as if the world itself was smudging out its illusions. Edward was asleep when I entered. His phone on the nightstand blinked with unread messages. I didn't need to check them. I could already guess the sender. I went into the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My reflection in the window was someone new, not broken, not burning, but deliberate. I whispered to it, "We don't scream. We calculate." The next days unfolded with surgical precision. At breakfast I smiled. At dinner I laughed at his tired jokes. At night I kissed him goodnight and waited until his breathing steadied before opening my laptop. By daylight I was still the loyal wife. By moonlight I was an investigator. I started by mapping his transactions. Every credit card charge, every reimbursement, every executive retreat expense. What I found made my chest tighten, not from heartbreak but from disgust. $18,000 to Lakeview Resorts and Spa. $9,600 to Chateau Mariner, private dining suite. Each labeled as team building. Each signed off by E. Hart. He had been using the company's veins to pump poison, stealing from investors, from employees, from me. I compiled everything into a digital dossier I called Project Clarity. It wasn't revenge yet. It was revelation. Because before you can destroy a lie, you must first see its full shape. 3 weeks later, the audit began. Officially, I was the concerned majority owner ensuring fiscal compliance. Unofficially, I was tightening in use. The lead auditor, a meticulous woman named Catherine Moore, sent me updates every few days. "Mrs. Hart, there are irregularities," she said over a secure call. "Transfers between internal accounts, unlogged withdrawals, discrepancies in salary records." "Keep going," I told her. "Every number is a confession." Meanwhile, Edward remained blissfully unaware. He still left at 8 a.m. sharp, still texted, "Busy day ahead, love you." He even bought me flowers, as if love could mask ledgers. I placed the bouquet on the table next to my open laptop and watched the petals wilt over spreadsheets. Every flower eventually reveals its stem, and every lie its source. One afternoon, Monica called. "Wilma, I think you should see this in person." When I arrived, she handed me a printout, a summary of unauthorized payments. The largest transaction, $120,000, Clara Wilkins, discretionary fund. The memo line read, "Wellness project." Monica's voice was calm. "That's not a project, Wilma. That's embezzlement." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I know. But I want him to present it to me himself." That evening I set the stage. I cooked his favorite meal, roast chicken, the same one from our early years. Candles. Soft music. The illusion of normalcy. When he walked in, his face lit up. "This is a surprise," he said, loosening his tie. "Yes," I replied. "You've been working so hard. You deserve it." Over dinner I asked questions, small, innocent. "How's Clara? Still helping with operations?" He blinked, careful. "Of course. She's excellent. Couldn't do half my job without her." "I'm sure," I said, sipping my wine. "It takes real talent to handle everything." He smiled, oblivious to the double meaning. When he finished eating, I handed him a small envelope. "This came for you," I said. He opened it, expecting a card. Inside was a photocopy of the Wellness Project transaction, his signature circled in red ink. He froze. "What is this?" "An accounting curiosity," I said softly. "You always said transparency builds trust." He laughed awkwardly. "You shouldn't look at that stuff, Wilma. It's complicated business." "Oh, I'm learning," I interrupted gently. "Actually, it's fascinating. Every dollar tells a story." He set the paper down, his voice tightening. "You went through company files?" I tilted my head. "No. They were sent to me as the majority owner." The silence that followed was pure theater. He blinked. "The what?" "The majority owner," I repeated, enunciating each word like a verdict. His face drained of color. "That's impossible." "Nothing's impossible," I said, standing up. "Just poorly calculated." He stammered something about paperwork, technicalities, partnerships, but I was already walking away. "I'm sure the auditors can explain it to you," I said over my shoulder. "They'll be in your office at 9 a.m. That night I didn't sleep beside him. I moved to the guest room, my first night alone in years. And it was peaceful. At 3 a.m. I woke briefly to the sound of pacing. He was in the hall, whispering into his phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I caught the tone, frantic, cornered. "Good." I smiled in the dark. Storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They start with pressure. And Edward was already breaking under it. The next morning I dressed calmly, poured my coffee and left before he could speak. At the cafe I watched through the window as he arrived at the office. He looked like a man walking into his own collapse, straightening his tie as if that could hold the walls. An hour later Catherine called. "Wilma, he's demanding to stop the audit. Threatening to fire us." "You can't," I said evenly. He doesn't have that authority. I do. I heard her smile through the phone. Understood, Mrs. Hart. By that afternoon, rumors had begun to ripple through the company. Employees whispered about compliance checks, irregularities, and an ownership review. Even Clara must have felt the air changing because she didn't show up to work that day. At home, Edward tried to act normal. "You're making a scene," he snapped. I laughed softly. "Scenes are for actors. I prefer documentaries." He slammed his fist against the table. "You're ruining everything." "No, Edward," I said quietly. "I'm revealing everything. There's a difference." That night, as he stormed out of the house, I opened my laptop and finalized a single press draft. It wasn't for release, not yet. The headline simply read, "Hart Dynamics under internal review following financial misconduct allegations." Below it, source, majority owner Wilma Hart. I didn't send it. I just saved it. When dawn came, I sat on the balcony with my coffee. The sky was bruised gray, the city hushed. I whispered to myself, not as a warning but as a promise. Tomorrow, the dinner table won't be the only place he loses his appetite. That afternoon, Catherine sent one final message. "Wilma, the irregularities extend beyond Edward and Clara. Several board members are involved. We'll need to escalate this." I looked out the window, feeling the first sunlight in weeks. Escalate. As I thought, let's escalate. Because the storm was only getting started. By the time the annual appreciation dinner arrived, Hart Dynamics had turned into a stage, and everyone was acting. The employees pretended not to notice the audit. The board pretended to trust Edward. And Edward pretended his world wasn't cracking at the seams. I, however, wasn't pretending anymore. The dinner was held at the Regency Hall, a place built for photographs, not truth. Crystal chandeliers. Gold table settings. Every detail polished to hide the scent of fear. The invitation described it as an evening to celebrate leadership. I almost laughed. Leadership, I thought. What a flexible word. When I entered the lobby, heads turned as if someone had broken the fourth wall of their performance. "Mrs. Hart," the coordinator gasped. We didn't know you'd be attending." "That's the thing about real owners," I said with a calm smile. "They don't need permission to show up." I handed her my coat and walked into the ballroom. Conversations froze for half a breath. Then came the polite ripple of applause like wind over glass. Edward stood near the stage mid-sentence with a cluster of investors. His face drained of color when he saw me. "Wilma," he said, forcing a smile. "You look radiant." "Thank you," I replied. "You look nervous." Next to him stood Clara, gold gown, hair swept to the side, every inch the perfect accessory. Her necklace shimmered under the lights, the letter E gleaming like a confession. "Darling," Edward said quickly, "you remember Clara, my operations liaison." I extended my hand. "Of course. We've met before, though she might not remember." Clara hesitated before touching my hand, her smile flickering for a split second. "Lovely to see you again, Mrs. Hart," she said softly. "I'm sure it is," I replied. Dinner began. The speeches dragged on, investors thanking visionary leadership, managers praising the family spirit of the company. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I sat quietly, letting the champagne bubbles reflect the chandeliers like tiny, spinning mirrors. Edward kept glancing at me from the head table, waiting for an explosion that never came. I smiled back every time. That's the problem with men like him. They prepare for storms, never for silence. Halfway through the evening, the master of ceremonies announced, "Tonight, we honor Edward Hart for his exceptional dedication and innovation." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Edward rose to speak, the perfect figure of corporate composure. He began his usual speech, about loyalty, vision, and sacrifice. But when he reached the word, honor, I stood up. "May I say something?" I asked. The microphone feedback stuttered. The room fell silent. Edward froze, unsure whether to laugh or panic. "Of course, dear," he said tightly. "By all means." I walked up to the stage, heels clicking like seconds counting down. I took the mic and turned to the crowd. "I'd like to thank you all," I began, voice steady, "for believing in this company and in the man who built it. As I believed in him too. For years. Nervous laughter rippled through the hall. I smiled. And belief, as we all know, is an investment. One that deserves transparency. I turned slightly toward Edward. My husband has often said this company is his life's work. But tonight I learned something remarkable. Legally it's mine. A murmur spread across the tables. Edward's smile faltered. Wilma, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, I said softly into the microphone. The ballroom lights glittered against the golden letters of the company logo behind us. Heart Dynamics Group. How fitting, I continued. Because what you're about to witness is a dynamic change. I nodded toward the side of the room. Monica stepped forward, poised, professional, carrying a folder. She wasn't just my lawyer tonight. He was my proof. An independent audit, I said, has revealed multiple unauthorized transfers and unethical practices executed under the current management, including personal misuse of company funds. Gasps. Phones lifted discreetly. I met Clara's eyes across the room. Some of those funds went toward, what did you call it, dear? A wellness project? Clara's face flushed crimson. Edward's jaw locked. He reached for the microphone, but I held it firmly. Please, I said, still smiling. You've had the floor for years. For the next 3 minutes I did what Edward never thought I could. I presented. Concise. Clear. Devastating. Screens behind us came alive with documents. Ownership certificates, signatures, audit summaries. Each slide another piece of truth he had buried. The crowd shifted from confusion to awe to shock. Investors began whispering. Board members exchanged looks. Edward's entire illusion, loyalty, power, control, unraveled under the same spotlight he'd always craved. When I finished, I set down the microphone and turned to him. Edward, you once told me discipline and loyalty are a leader's greatest assets. I couldn't agree more. That's why, effective immediately, the board will vote to suspend you pending full review. You can't do that, he shouted, his mask finally breaking. I can, I said. Majority ownership, remember? The room was silent except for the quiet click of camera shutters. Clara rose abruptly, knocking over her champagne glass. You can't humiliate us like this, she hissed. Us. I said gently. Thank you for confirming the partnership. She went pale. The investors watched everything, the scandal, the cracks, the truth. I smiled one last time. I suggest you both take the night off. Consider it an unpaid leave. Then I walked off the stage, applause following me like distant thunder. Slow, uncertain, but inevitable. In the car that night, I sat in silence as the driver pulled away from the hotel. Outside, flashes of cameras still painted the air. I exhaled slowly. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. The storm had passed and I was still standing. When I reached home, I poured a glass of water and looked at my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in years, the woman looking back didn't seem small. She wasn't the wife of the boss. She was the woman who had walked into a room full of lies and left with the truth. The next morning, Monica called. Wilma, she said, her voice calm but alert. Edward's been removed from the board. But the audit uncovered something else. Accounts overseas, property transfers, hidden assets. This goes deeper than we thought. I looked at the folder still on my table. My copy of Project Clarity. Good, I said quietly. Let's dig deeper. Because justice, like power, is sweetest when it's quiet. By morning, the hotel's crystal chandeliers existed only as reflections in gossip columns. Investors didn't call Edward. They called me. Monica arrived at 8:15 with a stack of documents and the look of someone who had slept with one eye open. 2 things, she said, stepping into my kitchen like it was a war room. 1. The board has voted to suspend Edward pending the audit. 2. The audit just found a set of auxiliary accounts. Offshore. I poured coffee into 2 cups, placed a spoon beside each and nodded for her to continue. I didn't blink. Not anymore. Cayman, Monaco, Malta, she said. All routed through Heart Dynamics Holdings, auxiliary. Guess who authorized the shells with her signature? She slid a paper across the marble. My own name stared back at me, clean, confident, obedient. The signature I used on thank you cards and holiday checks was now the gatekeeper of things I had never seen. I didn't sign those, I said. Monica's mouth softened. You signed something. A power of attorney at a charity event 6 years ago. He buried a clause inside an expedite packet. It happens. You're not the first woman to trust a man who was writing his own alibi. I set the cup down. Fine. Then we unwind his alibi. She smiled. Already started. The first call I made wasn't to the board. It was to Catherine, our lead auditor. Her voice was clipped, focused. We traced the auxiliary accounts to vendor payments, she said. The vendors don't exist. The addresses do, all mail drops. Who else is involved? I asked. A beat of silence. 3 board members approved discretionary transfers when Edward was out of the country. They'll deny knowledge. Then let them deny it on the record, I said. Today. I dressed in a navy suit that belonged to a woman I had not met until last week. Hair up. Minimal jewelry. The only ornament I carried was a pen. Because men like Edward think the blade is a dagger. Women like me know the blade is a signature. At 10 a.m. I walked into the boardroom for the special session. The long table gleamed like a clear conscience. Most of the faces around it did not. Mrs. Hart, the interim chair said, standing. A tremor of respect or calculation ran through the room. We appreciate your presence. I own the presence, I said softly. Carry on. Catherine opened with numbers. Monica followed with law. I watched the room the way a surgeon watches a monitor. Not for drama but for small changes in pulse. When Catherine presented the offshore chain, I saw it. A twitch at the mouth of a director who had once called me dear in front of investors. He looked smaller without his certainty. Gentlemen, I said, and then pointedly, and ladies. I glanced at 2 women on the board who had stopped smiling months ago. This isn't a witch hunt. It's a housekeeping. If you touched any of these accounts, now is the moment for your integrity to catch up to your resume. Silence. Papers rustled. A throat cleared. Finally, Langdon, the oldest director, exhaled. I signed 2 of the transfers, he said, eyes not meeting mine. Edward assured me they were legitimate. He had documentation. Edward had a habit of producing documentation, I replied, sliding a copy of my corrupted power of attorney packet forward. He's very good at paperwork when no one reads the pages. Second director spoke, then a third. Each confession a loose stone rolling down a slope that had been waiting to fall. Monica summarized in the language of consequences. Temporary removal. Independent counsel for each member. Full cooperation with the audit is mandatory. She looked to me. Owner's decision? Take their keycards, I said. Give them our gratitude for their years of service and a box for their memories. We'll revisit their futures when the numbers stop lying. No one argued. By noon, the company's arteries began to clear. I left the boardroom and walked the halls I had paid for without ever seeing. People looked up from their screens the way children look when a door opens after midnight. Fear, hope, curiosity. I nodded to each one, letting the wordless message pass. You are not the enemy. The rot was higher up. In the elevator, a young analyst stepped in and pressed her lips together. Mrs. Hart, she whispered. If you keep the audit, could you also look at the unpaid overtime logs? People are scared to file. I met her eyes. Bring me the log. And your name, I added, so I can put you on the task force that fixes it. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, like a string that had been tightened for years was finally cut. Edward had counted on fear. I would build with relief. At home that night, the house was quiet the way a battlefield is quiet after everyone has stopped lying to themselves. I opened my laptop and added a new folder to project clarity. Restoration. Inside, subfolders. People. Pros. COVID. It wasn't enough to expose the thieves. I would have to prove they weren't the company. I called Asha Patel, a COO whose name threaded whispers everywhere. The word turnaround had meaning. She answered on the second ring, voice measured. Ms. Hart. I need an operations leader who prefers daylight to spotlights. Pause. What are you rebuilding? Trust, I said. And books that add up. She didn't ask about the salary. Send the mess. I'll send a plan. The press didn't wait. By morning, articles bloomed across the city like invasive flowers. CO suspended amid audit, wife owns majority, assistant at center of probe. They used a photo of me from the dinner. Chin up, pearls reflecting the chandelier. A woman not asking permission from her own life. Edward texted at 6:02 a.m. "You're destroying me. Please stop before it's too late." I typed, "I'm not destroying you. I'm turning on the lights." I did not press send. Some messages are more powerful when you let the person imagine them unanswered. He followed with, "We can fix it. Together. Think of our history." I looked at the word history and finally pressed delete. The past had been the lock he kept trying to use as a door. At 9:30 a.m. I met with Catherine and Asha in a small conference room that smelled like new paint and old coffee. We walked line by line through the offshore accounts. Asha mapped the flows on a whiteboard, a clean lattice showing where the money had been taught to disappear. "3 prongs," she said, tapping the marker. "Immediate freeze on auxiliary accounts. Interim controls on expense approvals. And a culture shift. Nothing passes without 2 human signatures and 1 algorithmic anomaly check." Catherine nodded. "I'll coordinate with the bank. We'll need your authorization." I signed. The pen didn't shake. "Next," Asha said, "we resegment leadership. Who can be trusted?" "People who don't flinch at integrity," I said. "And people who haven't learned to call theft a strategy." We wrote names on sticky notes. Some stayed. Most didn't. That's the thing about a clean table. You discover how many chairs were for ghosts. By late afternoon, Clara finally broke her silence. She didn't call me. She called Monica. "She wants immunity," Monica said, eyes flat with professional boredom. "In exchange for emails." "What does she have?" "A lot of them," Monica said, including one with Edward's instructions on falsifying travel memos. She slid her phone across. I read the preview. "Use the spouse field. It's cleaner." I sat back. "She'll still face consequences." "She knows," Monica replied. "But she'd prefer fewer." "Meet her," I said. "Get everything. Then tell her to purchase a simple necklace with her own initials. She won't be wearing Edward's again." Monica smiled with her eyes. "Vicious." "Precise," I said. "There is a moment in every unraveling when the liar realizes the script has been taken away. For Edward, that moment arrived at 6:12 p.m. when he tried to enter the building and his badge blinked red. He rang my phone 14 times. I let it sing its little song and fade. On the 15th I answered. "Wilma," he said, voice caught between fury and pleading. "What are you doing?" "What you taught me," I said. "Following the paperwork. You can't lock me out of my own company." "I didn't," I said. "You did the day you put it in my name." He inhaled sharply. "You don't understand what you've started." "I understand exactly," I replied. For the first time. A long silence fell, the kind that precedes truth or collapse. He chose the latter. "You'll destroy us both," he whispered. I considered the word us and filed it under obsolete. "Edward," I said, "I'm not interested in destroying you. I'm interested in saving what's worth saving, and none of it is your lies." I ended the call. My hand didn't tremble. When a woman stops being a prop, the stage loses its power. The next morning we held a staff forum. No stage, no spotlight. Just people in a room with questions. I stood at the front with Asha and Catherine. "You deserve to know why this is happening," I said. "Here is the short version. Some leaders failed you. Most of you did not fail this company. We're removing the rot. We'll do it in daylight. And we'll be measured by 3 things. Clean numbers, fair work, and the kind of courage that doesn't need a speech." Hands went up. Questions came, fear-shaped, hope-shaped, practical. We answered each one. When it ended, a man from facilities stopped me at the door. "My wife watches your stories online," he said, embarrassed. "She'll be proud of you." I smiled. "Tell her I'm finally watching mine." By week's end, the offshore accounts were frozen, the complicit directors were officially out, and internal controls were real rather than decorative. The press, starved for drama, rotated to a new scandal. I let them. Quiet is where real work happens. Monica came by with a slim folder and a look I couldn't place. "One last find," she said, sliding the document across. "A trust." "His?" I asked. "Yours," she said. "Set up by Edward in your name, funded with diverted profits, and hidden from you." I opened it. Inside were properties I'd never seen, accounts I'd never touched. All titled to me but architected for him. A house on Lakeview, the retreat. An apartment in Monaco. A villa in the Turks and Caicos with a bookkeeping nickname, Eden. I stared at the word. Of course he'd call his hiding place paradise. Can we reclaim without poisoning the company? I asked. Yes, Monica said. Because the company didn't buy these. You did. He used you as cover. We'll take them back as restitution. Good, I said. Then we sell Eden. Use the funds for employee tuition and a whistleblower endowment. The rest pays down debt. No one gets to keep a paradise built on fraud. Monica's mouth curved. That will play well in the press. I don't care how it plays, I said. I care how it works. That night I stood on my balcony with the city breathing below me. I thought about the first day at the security desk, how small I felt when the guard said the boss's wife was already inside. I looked at my hands, clean now not because they never touched the mess but because they learned how to wash it out. A message pinged. From an unknown number. You don't know me. My sister worked under Clara. Thank you. I typed back, we're not done. Then I added a second line I had earned. But we're better. At dawn, Catherine called with a new voice, part triumph, part alarm. Wilma, she said, the last server mirror just finished indexing. There's a folder Edward thought he deleted. Travel documents. Not just for Clara. For someone else. A man. Private investigator. She paused. He's been building a case. On you. I watched the sky turn from pewter to gold and felt nothing but steady. Good, I said. Send me everything. Because the next move wouldn't just be about numbers. It would be about rewriting the story he thought he could tell about me. When Catherine told me Edward had hired a private investigator to watch me, I almost laughed. The same man who'd lived off my trust now wanted proof of my rebellion. What he didn't understand was that I had stopped rebelling. I was governing. I opened the folder she'd sent. Photos of me leaving the legal office, copies of my own emails, even the timestamp from the night I first visited the cafe across from his building. He'd built an investigation not to protect his empire, but to rewrite history before it finished collapsing. Let him collect, I told Catherine. The more he gathers, the clearer his confession will be. Still she was cautious. He's desperate, Wilma. Men like that make mistakes when cornered. I know, I said. That's why I'm giving him a door. It just doesn't lead where he thinks. 2 days later, Edward requested a private discussion. The message was formal, as if we were still partners on paper. Hart Residence. 7 p.m. I agreed. When he arrived he looked smaller. The air of certainty that used to fill a room before him now trailed behind like smoke. He stood by the window avoiding my eyes. You've turned everyone against me, he said quietly. No, I replied. You did that. I just turned the lights on. He tried again. You could have told me about the audit. We could have handled it together. I tilted my head. Like the offshore accounts. The fake invoices. The assistant listed as my replacement at corporate dinners. His face twitched. That wasn't, Wilma. It got out of hand, but it wasn't personal. I laughed. Of course not. You never make things personal. That's why people keep trusting you. You only borrow their names. He took a step closer. If you think destroying me will make you happy. Edward, I cut in softly. You still don't understand. Happiness isn't what I'm after. Integrity is. I handed him a document envelope. These are your resignation papers. Sign them voluntarily and the board will let you leave quietly. No headlines about criminal charges, no police at your door. He didn't move. And if I refuse? Then I'll let the system finish what you started. You can either step down or be escorted out. His hand trembled as he took the pen. You always did know how to sound calm while ending things, he muttered. It's a skill I learned from you, I said. He signed. The empire cracked in ink. After he left, the silence in the house was almost holy. 4 years, every object here had been part of his choreography. The leather chairs, the clock synchronized to his routine. Now they sat still as if waiting for new instructions. I walked from room to room turning off lights. One by one the illusions dimmed. The next morning I delivered the signed papers to the board. Edward Hart, founder and CEO, officially resigned for personal reasons. Within an hour the internal memo was public. By noon investors called not with panic but with relief. Asha stood beside me as we watched the news feed scroll across the conference room screen. "Congratulations," she said softly. "The company's breathing again." "No," I replied. "It's exhaling. We spent the next weeks rebuilding." Asha led operations. Catherine finalized the compliance cleanup. Monica coordinated with prosecutors. Edward would face civil penalties but no prison, provided he surrendered the stolen funds and overseas properties. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like accountability. At first, employees tiptoed around me. The myth of the CEO's wife still hung in the air like smoke. But one morning a designer stopped me in the hallway. "Mrs. Hart," she said, "thank you for staying." I smiled. "Please call me Wilma. And thank you for not leaving." Little by little the fear faded. Lunchrooms filled again. Laughter returned, hesitant but real. The building stopped echoing with secrecy and started to sound like work again. Honest, imperfect work. We changed the company slogan that month. Edward's old line, "Discipline and loyalty," came down from the wall. In its place we hung 3 new words. "Transparency builds trust." The first time I walked past it I felt something rare. Peace that didn't depend on applause. Edward called only once after his resignation. The number flashed across my phone late one evening. I let it ring twice before answering. "I read the statement," he said. "You made me sound like a monster." "You wrote the script," I replied. "I just stopped whispering it." He was quiet. Then softly, "Do you ever think we could start over?" I looked out the window where the city lights rippled across the glass like new constellations. "Edward," I said, "starting over isn't the same as pretending nothing happened." He sighed. "You always did get the last word." "No," I said, ending the call. "Just the right one." I never heard from him again. 6 months later, Heart Dynamics was no longer the empire of one man's ego but the collective work of hundreds who'd finally been seen. Asha became CEO, the first woman to hold the title in the company's history. She asked me to stay on as chairwoman. I declined. "Why?" she asked. "Because building this place again was my closure," I said. "Now it needs new eyes." She nodded. "Then what's next for you?" I said, "I'll learn how to rest without feeling guilty." On my last day in the building, the same security guard who once told me, "The boss's wife comes here every day," opened the door for me. He looked nervous. Ms. Hart, I didn't know." I smiled. "It's all right. You were just doing your job." So was I. Outside, the sky was the same soft gray it had been the day everything began. But this time it didn't look heavy. It looked open. I walked to the cafe across the street, the one where I'd written the first notes of Project Clarity. The barista recognized me. "Americano, right?" "Yes," I said. "And this time I'll drink it slow." When the cup arrived, I opened my notebook, the same one that had once held timestamps and witness names. Now the pages were almost empty. Only one line waited at the top. "He had a wife at work. Now I have a life that works." I underlined it once, gently. Outside the window, a new logo was being hoisted onto the building's facade. Novarise Corporation, the rebranded company now free of its ghosts. I watched the crane lift the metal letters into the morning light. It felt like watching my own name rise, even if it wasn't spelled the same way. People sometimes ask why I didn't take revenge sooner. The truth is, speed was never the point. Justice that comes fast often fades just as quickly. But justice that's measured, that stays. I didn't burn his empire. I audited it. I didn't ruin his reputation. I let him introduce himself honestly for the first time. And I didn't destroy the company. I freed it, from him and from the version of myself that thought loyalty meant silence. So if you ever find yourself standing outside a door that used to open for you, remember, sometimes you're not being locked out. You're being guided away. He built an empire on my trust. I rebuilt a life on my truth.